Well, it's mid-December now, and we've had our first round of pretty cold, below freezing temperatures in Middle Tennessee. So it's time for a freeze-damaged update to see who sailed through it with flying colors and who took damage. First off, we have the Little Gem Magnolia, and this tree is one that had been tricked by all of the warm weather late in the fall into continuing growth, so it had some non-hardened leaves and some new buds here heading into December, which was of course destined for disaster. And you can see that wherever that was the case on the tree, including an active bloom in December, that was destroyed by the frost, but the regular foliage is still that nice dark green glossy leaf that has zero damage. And I would say this is performing as expected. Normally the tree would be finished growing and completely winter hardened by the time we get to December freezes, and in that case it would be completely hardy. So I would say this is just fine. This is normal. Normal in the sense that if it were to have unhardened foliage it would be damaged, but abnormal in the sense that it had unhardened foliage this late in the season. But the species is performing as expected, which is good news. And as a contrast, we have this D.D. Blanchard cultivar of the same species, which had no new growth, and you can see it has zero cold damage. And one more magnolia data point for you. The Edith Pogue magnolia, no damage. In fact, this little browning you see here, I think, is due to Phylosticta fungus and not cold weather, which I have discussed at length in the past, and it seems that the Edith Pogue can outgrow it. Switching to the other magnolia species, this is Magnolia virginiana, sweet bay magnolia, some mild browning and yellowing on a few of the leaves for this particular specimen. Here's a different specimen with perhaps just a little bit of browning on the leaves due to cold damage, nothing major. One more sweet bay magnolia, this is the Moonlight cultivar, that's why the leaves look different, no real damage. I think this one leaf was already turning yellow due to fungus before the cold weather. And yet another Moonlight cultivar of the sweet bay magnolia, zero damage as far as I can tell. Moving on to cherry laurel, Prunus laurocerasus, that is. The tender growth at the top, which was out of season, has taken damage, but the regular leaves, no damage. And by the way, this is a north-facing, wind-exposed site, so that just tells you how hardy the regular Prunus laurocerasus cherry laurel is. Pretty hardy. And now good news, again, the Elysium henryi, Chinese anise, just planted, a very small specimen, and it doesn't appear to have taken any damage. And I even checked on it during the extreme cold and the leaves were drooping a little bit, which is normal for this entire genus. And it looks great, doing very well. Okay, we're to Daphnephilum macropodum. This was one species that was new for me going into the winter, and I was a little bit worried about its hardiness. I have two specimens of the species. One I've planted in a very protected, semi-shaded location, which is this one. So this one in the protected spot is looking great. The other Daphnephilum macropodum is in more of a full sun, mostly sun location, a little bit more exposed to wind, and it looks like there's been some browning and freeze damage in this location, but not the worst, considering that this tree was probably in a greenhouse or growing, I think maybe in South Carolina or North Carolina, something like that. So it was probably a little bit warmer, and I would say it has performed pretty well considering that, and especially it got down to I don't know, maybe 10 degrees below freezing, so pretty cold. That's like 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Here we have Osmanthus heterophylla. This is the Sasaba cultivar, and the most cold hardy Osmanthus, Asian Osmanthus that is. And you can see there's a little freeze damage here on the tips, which I think were very late growth. So once again, like the magnolia, kind of out of season growth. But the rest of the foliage appears to be perfectly hardy. So I would say that the Osmanthus heterophylla is performing as expected. Now for the North American Osmanthus analog, the Cartrema americana. devilwood seems to be doing pretty good. I guess these are a few leaves that maybe got blown off in the strong wind, but overall it looks amazingly good. And this tree is planted in a northern exposure, a partial sun, lots of wind location, and it's looking pretty good considering it was just planted a couple weeks ago. So definitely still very enthusiastic about Cartrema americana. Now checking on the quote-unquote Clayera, this is Turnstroemia gymnanthera, Bigfoot cultivar in this case. There was some late growth which was damaged, but most of the tree with its fully hardened growth looks pretty good. Interestingly, this other cultivar of Turnstroemia gymnanthera, which is the Liane cultivar, has no damage, and it's in a pretty cold, partial sun location here. Probably less protected than the Bigfoot one we just looked at, and this one has reddish growth when the foliage just emerges, so that red is not a result of the cold. It was already red, but it seems to be pretty tough. So if you had to choose and you're growing Clayera in a marginal location pretty far north, Bigfoot is going to grow taller, but the Liane cultivar, or maybe, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Liane, seems to be slightly more cold hardy, so possibly a better choice in very northern locations if you try to grow that species. Now moving on to hollies, this is the screenplay holly, which is a hybrid of two Chinese species, Ilex latifolia and Ilex integra, and it had a lot of late growth here on this one branch, which is all completely dead, and also a little bit on the interior here, which showed a lot of damage. But crucially, the fully hardened mature growth has taken no damage. So that is pretty good news. And let's see if that story holds up through the entire winter. This is one holly that's probably most at risk for cold damage in Middle Tennessee. There was a little late growth on the Blue Prince holly. This is a hybrid between Ilex aquifolium and Ilex rugosa. So damage taken there, a little bit on the top as well. And here is a success story, the gallberry holly, Ilex coriaceae, native to Florida. Zero damage as far as I can tell. This Nellie Stevens holly was also attempting to push growth very late into the season, and as a reminder, Nellie Stevens holly is a hybrid between Ilex aquifolium and Ilex cornuta, and so you can see that winter freeze burn right there and right there at the very top. Not really worried about this because obviously the rest of the tree looks great and it will send up new shoots and grow in a different direction, which is one of the great attributes about holly, is that it can regrow from old wood. And another good bit of news, for the first time after a major freeze event, there has not been any damage to the southern wax myrtle. This is Myrica cerifera, and in previous years we've had maybe a bit of bad luck when it got to -4, which eventually defoliated the whole tree, and then the following year got to +4, Fahrenheit of course, and that turned a lot of the foliage brown, and eventually I think most of those leaves also fell off. So pretty much every leaf you see on this tree has been sprouted as new growth during 2024. And here we are at the end of 2024 when the temperatures hit the teens briefly and there's no damage to it. So just giving you an idea of real world experience with the cold hardiness of the species. I still think it's good to plant in Middle Tennessee. It's obviously very fast growing, but I have also been very deliberate about trimming it to try to strengthen the wood, because everything I read online says this species is extremely susceptible to ice storms, and so I'm trying not to let it get too top heavy, which it would do without proactive pruning. But as of now, very satisfied with this tree. And no damage to the Carolina laurel, Prunus caroliniana. Looking very good. Another interesting note, the oak leaf holly or Oakland holly had a little bit of new growth, not as late as the others, and it's just fine. So good news. The Dragon Lady holly did have the smallest bit of late push growth here, and that has been killed. But the rest of the Dragon Lady holly looks just fine, so this species or hybrid is performing as expected. I believe it's a hybrid between Ilex equifolium and Ilex perni. A small bit of late season growth on the Dahoon holly, Ilex cassine, and some browning there, but actually not as much damage as I might have expected headed into the cold. Just the edges of some, and obviously this tree will be able to resprout and keep growing. So Dahoon holly once again proves itself to be extremely cold hardy. As far as conifers go, there wasn't a single conifer in my collection that sustained any sort of cold damage as expected. 20 degrees is not enough to really challenge any of the conifers. So this was mainly an update about broadleaf evergreens, and hopefully it'll give you some more detailed information about what to expect on these species that are often labeled as being hardy in Zone 7, and for the most part they are, unless there's extremely warm weather late in the season that tricks them into putting out new growth. Okay, bonus content here. I'm just looking at my Thuja Green Giants, and I'm very paranoid about these because I didn't actually plant these really tall ones you see here in the background. I had paid a landscaping company to plant them, and over the years I've lost several of them, and in every case when I excavated the root ball and the stump, I found that there were old roots from different trees buried right underneath the trees that were planted, telling me they did a pretty crappy job of digging out a spot for the tree and removing any unwanted roots from that area. And so I'm always on the lookout for the slightest hint that another one is going to die. What do you think about the one in the middle? The way they work is they look great and then they go slightly yellowish and then they turn brown completely and die. Actually, this could just be seasonal bronzing. Sometimes the Thuja Green Giant will bronze in the winter with cold, and I bet that's what's happening here because this one maybe gets more sun than others in the row, so we'll see. But if you have Thuja Green Giant and it's in an area that was formerly woodland and you suspect there are lots of buried roots, be careful about how much Thuja Green Giant you plant there, because I think this species is more susceptible than others to root rot. Okay, I was wrong. There is more information I need to give you about broadleaf evergreens. This is Prunus lusitanica, Portuguese laurel, and it did have some late growth, but only took very minor damage, and the rest of the tree looks great. So Portuguese laurel handled 19 degrees, 18 degrees very well. Partial sun location, and right next to that, Pyracantha, coccinea, firethorn. I believe this is the Yukon Bell cultivar. No trouble whatsoever with the cold. Once again, partial sun location. So very good, very tough evergreens, highly recommended. And last but not least, it wouldn't be a broadleaf hardiness update if I didn't talk about the Elysium parviflorum, the star performer of all broadleaf evergreens, very underutilized in Tennessee, native to Central Florida. What an awesome tree. It has seen -4 with 0 damage, and once again looks fantastic coming out of some teens. I highly recommend it if you have not already purchased one.